Greetings and welcome to another edition of AUHSD Future Talks. I'm your host, Michael Matsuda, the superintendent of the Anaheim Union High School District. And as our 7,000 plus podcast listeners know, this show is dedicated to the future of education in the United States. And we've been so lucky to have an amazing array of educational leaders and thought partners. And today we are blessed to have Jan Morrison, founder of TIES. And we're going to hear more about that in a second. But Jan, welcome to our little show.
Well, thanks, Michael. I really appreciate the invitation, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So Jan is the founder and CEO of TIES, the Teaching Institute for Excellence in STEM. And she has an amazing life contribution to the field of STEM, working with the Department of Education, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations, the Bechtel Foundation, and on and on and on, Jan. So an amazing biography over really decades of being a national leader in the STEM education field. So we always start with a little bit, Jan, about how you came to be, who you are, and your whole mission and driver, and how did that come to be?
Well, thanks, Michael. That is a really good question, particularly, I think, for somebody like me. I was born into a family that only knew STEM. And of course, that wasn't an acronym. My father was a practicing physician before he was out of his teens. My mother was a chemist on the Manhattan Project. So was I, as the eldest child in the family, going to do anything but that? Of course not. Did I live a life as a child all about discovery and the world and the natural world and the man-made world? And absolutely the case. So I was insatiable at that time. So it was really very clear that that's the trajectory. But it wasn't clear what that meant. And when I was in college, I had the great good fortune of being able to be a teaching assistant from the moment I walked into undergraduate, and loved teaching. And so 35 years of teaching in all kinds of schools, very often schools that needed to be a little different than they were. And we're looking for something that would advance their students in ways that they were hoping for, but hadn't been able to do by themselves. And then honestly, after 35 years, a foundation approached me and said, listen, maybe what you're doing part-time for the cities like of Baltimore and others, you should do full-time, and help me to found TIES. And now TIES is going to be next month, 22 years old.
That is so amazing. And I know that TIES is positioned with so many partnerships, not only across the country, but internationally. And can you just tell us a little bit currently about what TIES is doing and what they've prioritized in their
Sure.
project?
I think from the moment we formed TIES, and the name was intentional. TIES is all about creating infrastructures and systems and using the process of design to ensure that all the work that we do with our students and our children and developing their futures is sustainable. We've always used the tagline, helping children to make sense of the world. I think 22 years later, that's the basis of TIES. So when you think about that, what does that mean? That means when STEM was finally an acronym at the early part of, when we turned this millennium, then what did we do to realize STEM? We built STEM schools. We designed them as models. How do you teach STEM? And we were involved in that. And then what is a community's opportunity to interact with STEM? How do industry and business partner with schools, with the faith-based community, with parents, with the after-school community, higher education, post-secondary, and so on? And the answer is because they act like an ecosystem. And they create the opportunity to be a collective. And there's always power in the collective. And so that TIES has been designing STEM ecosystems throughout our world for the last decade as well. So we're really where we're located is always where there's a system to be revised or created, where there are institutions that need to be different than what they're doing, but always, always has to penetrate down to making the lives of students and children and their families different and giving them the imperative to find their own futures.
You know, I love that under your vision and guidance, you've created these FAB Labs. I love that name,
Right.
FAB Lab, digital fabrication labs,
Right.
with, partnering with the MIT and other partners. Could you tell us a little bit about the FAB Labs?
Sure. When we're talking about the future and we're connecting education to workforce, what do you want children to be able to do and demonstrate? And we've been clear on standards in states and a lot of textbook work and even PBL, the project-based learning. But what does it look like when a child comes up with an idea and follows that idea from design to actual build? And what tools would they use and become good at, and those skills that'll be useful for their futures? And the answer is digital fabrication, additive manufacturing. So what we've done for almost 2 decades is that we have gone into schools and we have helped them to envision what it would look like in curriculum and then to design the labs with them. Laser cutters, 3D printers, CNC machines, extruders, digital sewing machines, so that students, no matter what student, can go from that idea of ideation to real production. It's been a glorious way of bringing STEM to schools, particularly underserved ones.
Yes, amazing work. And, you know, you've have a lot of experience with these collaboratives. You call them the ecosystems of, innovation. It's a lot easier said than done, isn't it? And what are some of the challenges in your work with communities trying to getting everybody? It's like herding cats sometimes.
It is.
Get them all together.
It is. I think the idea is that you have to have proof points. People and institutions want to know that they're better for working collaboratively rather than losing anything. And I think when you start to talk about collaboration, people will come to it slowly. When the real test is can you get people to work together so that they're empowered? Is there something that they could do together that they couldn't do by themselves? And that's the real point in which you see inventive behavior. You see that empowerment bring things to a community and to the work of the future in ways you would never see before. Once you get that into a community, no matter whether it's a state or as small as a school district with their parents, they're hooked because then they know the power of being a partner.
Yeah. So again, how do you sort of keep track of all of these projects that you have that you're involved with worldwide, and just all these partners, including many major urban school districts across the country?
Well, we have wonderful staff at TIES, and many have been there for almost the full duration of that 22 years. So they have embodied the stories that we have been part of, the creation of those stories. So keeping track is not always just the collection of data. It is at least that, but it's also understanding the value of story. And it is so much easier for all of us to tell a story and to come to another community or to the work itself, armed with those wonderful, wonderful stories that really are the proof points themselves. In some cases, they feel ethnographic, where we've made observations, we've seen change in culture. Many of them also are the stories of changing behavior. And you see children who really didn't see a future for themselves now empowered and leaders themselves in the work, either in STEM or in their own communities or even in our nation. That tends to be indelible. So it's not too hard to follow it.
You know, you're one of the few organizations that have an international presence, and so, and you're in places like Egypt and Bermuda. I mean, just
Right.
amazing countries that you're working with. How does the United States stack up internationally in terms of STEM education? Because we're always trying to compare ourselves to other countries.
I think, to tell you the truth, for early on when we were doing international work, and particularly in Egypt, it was clear to us that we in America had models of schools and pedagogies and embraced the work in ways that Egypt really wanted for themselves. But fast forward 15 years, they have done that and more. And differently. And I think what we've learned in international is that everybody has a value proposition that meets the needs of their own population. And it's always good to understand that and to really with depth and some coherence, but not with value judgment. Because the cultures are different, the problems and the issues come very differently as a result. So it's good to know that and to have that in your toolbox, and then really have process that helps to do that kind of comparison, not discrete product. So when you're looking at a STEM school in Egypt or one in Israel or one in Bermuda, and then you go to Cleveland, Ohio, and that's also called a STEM school, they all serve their children in ways that are magnificent, but they're different. And they're different with the right kind of differences. What's important in that is that they have the opportunities to collect, to share stories and to learn from each other as there is a commonality. And I think when you're engaging children, you have to be authentic. And you have to, one of the important pieces that's common in all of these schools is that it is not school for the sake of school. It is school with the idea that there's a lifetime of learning for those children, and that the skills that they learn and are able to demonstrate are what become the foundation for the world of work for them for a lifetime.
You know, I know that this is part of your DNA in terms of the innovation and problem solving, but, you know, folks are going to ask, well, maybe you've been asked this before, why not STEAM, right, in terms
Right.
of the arts and
Sure.
creativity piece? How do you respond to that?
Well, I have to smile because when TIES was formed and the acronym was formed almost simultaneously, there was that discussion. But if you look at science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and you look at it in a real way, you're going to see you can't part from the arts. You cannot, if you're going to be honest about it, the arts are embedded in it, and design is embedded in it. And designful way of working and approaching it. So problem solving is embedded in all of that, and innovation. So whether you put the A on or not, and our federal government decided not to, and that's why we don't, but we have forever considered it an integral part. Curiosity and creativity if you omit it, then you do not have STEM.
STEM leads with science. Arguably, we're at a place in this country where there's growing numbers of folks that question science. What do you respond to that? And the concern among many in the education space that we're kind of at a critical juncture when there is a questioning of the use of science in the classroom.
Well, it would be naturally for me to say that they are thinking wrongfully, and that they're not looking around. They're not walking through a national park. They're not strolling down Manhattan and looking around the man-made structures. And they haven't taken a journey off the earth to some interface beyond our atmosphere. All of that embodies the nature of science. And what's really striking to me in that conversation is the lack of understanding of the history of science. I think when we're talking about anything contemporary, in a contemporary way, Michael, and you and I talk about that all the time, we are also products of our history. And so is science. When you look back at Faraday's Christmas lectures and the chemical history of a candle, how do you discount science involved when they may have made the argument over time? And I think that's what's a shame in those people's lives, is that they haven't had the advantage of being part of that kind of discourse and learning. And I'm sorry for that, because our world is scientific, and it is man-made as well. And what we do so well as humans, when we live our lives well on this planet, is that we're respectful and smart about leveraging the way nature is and respectfully understanding it.
You know, Jana, I think it's just amazing that we have a woman leading this TIES group in the STEM charge across the country, because arguably many of us in schools are still struggling trying to get more girls and women in STEM. What advice do you have to bring more girls into the STEM experience?
Well, I think it's all about role models. I do. I think that you have to be able, we have a lot of catchphrases right now. You have to be able to belong. You have to see yourself. You have to be able to emulate, girls and wonderful boys, but especially the girls. And when you have that in front of you, when you have it as part of your family, when it is also provided for girls so that they feel enabled and not disarmed by it and worry that they're smart enough. We hear that a lot from girls. I'm not smart enough. I'm not a math person. That's because they've heard that before. When you actually provide the opportunities and they feel the respect from the adult world and from their peers, then they see it as possible. I have 6 grandchildren. I have 3 girls. And their mothers are amazingly enabling of that. Whether or not they become STEMists or scientists or whatever is irrelevance at the moment to the fact that they feel that those questions they want to ask are good questions, and they're something that they're questions that should be respected. And I think that's what you want for all of our girls. But I also want to say this. I think the system, especially the post-secondary system, is not designed to support the kind of trajectories that you are working with and for in your district. When they head off to those post-secondary experiences and feel enabled and they're going to do it, we have constraints. We have choke points that have got to be dissolved. And if you were to ask me in this next few years what we should be turning to in order to get this to enable the girls and the underserved population into STEM, we've got to get these choke points figured out. And without territory, there are choke points. The data shows it. Okay, so let's now figure out how we can solve those problems.
So the big hot topic for now and probably in the next decade is AI and its effect on the world. Where do you stand? And I know the answer, but in terms of the promise and the challenges of AI?
I think it's an amazing promise, and it's not new. Yale has had a degree in undergraduate AI for 50 years. So I do not fear it, and I don't think and I think everything in our world comes with risk. You manage risk. You don't run from it. So AI is really important, but I also feel that we have got to be careful about our language. We talk about AI, and that's really important, but just 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we were talking about CS, computational sciences, computational thinking and literacies. So where does that fit? And then in my community, because we have the quantum computer, the healthcare quantum computer in Cleveland, we're all about quantum. Well, where's quantum in this? And what about the data science work that's been going on, and the new data science courses and cybersecurity. It is all emerging technologies. So what we should be using and saying is, where does emerging technologies fit into our world? And how do we make it useful? And how do we find fabulous examples of it in teaching and learning in school, teaching and learning out of school, and then in areas where we struggle, like in healthcare?
You know, maybe a mutual friend of ours, Keith Stryer from NVIDIA,
Right.
has said that, Mike, governments need to start looking at access to supercomputers and this emerging technology as infrastructure, because the costs are over. I mean, they're going to be tremendous costs, and you're going to have access problems with the have and have-nots.
Right.
Your response to that, and what kind of policy things do you envision that need to happen?
Well, I have been from the beginning a proponent of understanding this as a utility. The way our mindset is about providing for water, for sanitation, for electricity, there is absolutely, in my mind, no difference. So we would never want to not put water as accessible in any community in our country or in the planet. Why would we do anything differently? And I think if we're going to thrive, and there's a difference between making it and passing and thriving. And I think in any community, our children and their families are looking to thrive. If we're going to thrive, then it has to be part of a utility approach. And we've seen that in certain communities. We've seen the difference. And it will reduce the have and have-nots, as you've said. We have to be willing on a policy level to take that on head on. We have to be willing on a financial support so that our tax base is supportive of that. But then I look at that as far as schooling is as well. I mean, schooling and our tax base and the way we're structuring the support for public education has to change as well. So as long as we're changing and we're advancing, let's change it, that whole piece.
Jan, you have access to a lot of high-level policymakers, politicians, and so forth. Is that resonating with folks? Are people beginning to talk about the AI supercomputers as a utility?
I think they will. Where we are right now is to reduce the fear and to get the conversations about risk without mythology. There's an awful lot of mythology that's going on. Those communities that have bridged that, like your own, then the mindset is very different, because then it doesn't just become a need. It becomes part of the oxygen of that community. And as soon as you get to that level, then you can speak about utilities. And leadership is everything in that.
So the final minutes, I do want to talk about the tremendous task ahead of retraining and uptraining our teachers in the classroom with these tools. What is your advice on strategy, and what needs to happen, given that many teachers are more senior and less inclined to work with technology?
Well, I think it's a two-pronged approach. First of all, our pre-service institutions, every single one of them ought to be right now figuring out what their curricula, how they're amending their curriculum. And they're embracing this, and what's the kind of culture that they want us to support for our pre-service teachers, so that we're not constantly asking this question. On our veterans, of which there are many, I think they have to be given permission. They have to be, I think many of them, if given permission, will go ahead on their own level and tinker. And if they're given the opportunity to tinker and feel that they can do that, they will do that. I do. I was a veteran teacher, and I think it will happen. When we point a finger and say you must, or when we put them in the position of acknowledging that they're older and they're mature and they can be opted out, I think that's not a good thing either, because then they feel ancient. And we saw that with the coming of the calculators. I came into the world with a slide rule. Even in college, I had to use a slide rule. That was inane given the fact we had calculators, but we weren't given permission. I think that our leadership in our education institutions really need to do this. I also feel that if the younger generation of teachers is partnered with the more mature and our vets in ways that our vets can help them to understand pedagogy and how to work with students and build respect, then I think you're going to find that they also build their own capability on technology, because their mentee is doing that with them. We do that with the kids. I don't know why we wouldn't do that with the teachers.
Makes a lot of sense, Jan, and you have made a lot of sense and a lot of difference in the STEM world. I want to end with a quote that you talk about, that we need to help all children make sense of the world and find themselves STEM literate, STEM capable, and excited about making STEM their life's work. STEM has been your life's work, Jan, and on behalf of all of our listeners, I want to thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been just wonderful. I really appreciate the conversation.